Okay, we begin on this last video for our advanced ecology unit, the Bio 321. And in this video, we'll look at the process through which litter gets decomposed. Okay, so the decomposition of litter, the process through which this litter is broken down, is an important ecological process because through it, dead plant material, so things like leaves, things like branches, are now broken down into simpler, both organic and inorganic compounds. So by breaking down this dead plant material, nutrients get to be recycled because whatever components that the plant material has will now be recycled back into nutrients, which then enriches the soil because it will be eventually getting incorporated into the soil. And by doing so, the entire ecosystem then gets supported. Okay. So to begin with, let's define what this process of litter decomposition is. So litter decomposition refers to the breakdown of dead plant material. This breakdown might occur by physical or chemical or equally through biological processes. So after being broken down, the decomposed material, which has now been broken down, will eventually become part of the soil organic matter. By doing that, then this decomposed material will then play a critical role in the nutrient cycling, the cycles through which nutrients now are part of the plant. As that plant part dies, then it's decomposed, it's broken down. Then it becomes part of the soil organic matter. Then whatever is in the soil is now taken by some other plant. So you are now recycling the nutrients. And by extension, then you are ensuring there is energy flow within the ecosystem. So the stages, this litter decomposition happens through stages. Okay? And the key stages of this litter decomposition process, the first key stage is fragmentation. So fragmentation can occur through physical breakdown, where larger plant materials, or things like leaves, branches, the bark, are broken down into smaller pieces. So you're just fragmenting a bigger piece into a smaller piece, but of the same material. So in this case then, you can have physical forces, so things like wind. Upepo inazongesha hiyo matawi, upepo inagongesha the branch, then it breaks down into smaller part, but still of the same branch, still of the same leaf. So the state is not changing, only the size. It's just fragmenting it into smaller pieces. So physical forces, either wind or rain, can do this physical breakdown. Then equally you can have mechanical action of animals. If animals are moving up and down through an ecosystem, then the hooves of these animals will trample on the leaves, will trample on the bark, will trample on the branches. Then whatever was big will now be broken down through the physical activity. Another thing is the detritival activity. The detritivals, these are the organisms like earthworms, insects, millipedes. So they will chew and shred this litter. So shredding is breaking it down into smaller pieces, still fragmentation. When they do that, they therefore increase the surface area. As we break it down into smaller pieces, we are increasing now the surface area for microorganisms to colonize, for microorganisms now to come and attack these smaller pieces. The second stage is leaching. Leaching occurs when now through water solubilization, soluble compounds within this branch or dead parts that have now been broken down into smaller particles, soluble compounds are now dissolved in water and they are carried away. Okay, so they are carried away from this litter into the soil. That's leaching, moving it from what is present in the litter into the soil. So leaching helps in nutrient redistribution. So through the soil profile, the nutrients will be moved, will be distributed, will be redistributed. What was found in one layer will be moved to a different layer because the water is dissolving that nutrient and moving it to a different layer. So through the redistribution, the nutrients will then become available either to the roots or to the microbes. Okay, so leaching is just about dissolving and moving, dissolving and moving. That moving helps to distribute the nutrients through the profile of the soil. The third stage is now the chemical breakdown. So in this case now, they have one is the enzymatic decomposition, where the microorganisms like the fungi, the bacteria are now releasing enzymes. So the enzymes that are released in this case could target either the cellular component, so you have the cellulase as an enzyme. There are those enzymes that will be released to target the lignin. Then you are talking of the ligninase, the enzymes that are targeting the lignin. Okay, so the ligninase. So what these enzymes are doing is they are helping to break down the complex molecules that are present in the litter into more simpler compounds. So sequentially, these compounds will be broken down. So not all of them are broken down at once, but simpler ones, things like starch, they will decompose faster, they will be broken down faster. But more complex ones, tougher ones like lignin, they will take a bit more time. They will require more specialized microorganisms for them to be broken down. So the process of degradation happens in sequences. That's why we're calling it sequential degradation. So there are some that will degrade very fast, but there are others that will take a bit of time. Then you have the mineralization. Through this process now, you talk of the conversion into inorganic forms, which are now usable by the plants. So it's the conversion of organic material into inorganic forms, which the plants can use. Then you have respiration and this release of CO2. Respiration requires oxygen, okay? But the byproduct of that is carbon dioxide, which is now being released. So this process that is happening, the microorganisms are undergoing respiration. So they are using oxygen, but as a byproduct, they are releasing CO2, okay? Then humification, which is now the formation of humus. So some organic compounds will resist complete decomposition, okay? And they will form humus. So humus is a stable, dark, nutrient-rich substance. And what humus does is that it improves the soil structure. It improves the ability of the soil to retain moisture. It also improves the cation exchange capacity of the soil. Okay, so in essence, humus then will support long-term fertility of the soil. So when soil has more humus, then in long term, in terms of time, the fertility of that soil can be enhanced. So the key decomposers, the key microorganisms that are involved in litter decomposition. So one, you have the microorganisms, which are the primary decomposers. So you are talking of bacteria, for example. So these ones are among the most abundant decomposers, and they help to break down simple organic compounds. So you are talking of things like sugars, amino acids. Those are simple organic compounds which are now broken down by bacteria. More complex ones, things that are a bit tough, are now broken down by fungi. Okay, so things like cellulose, things like lignin, those are broken down by fungi. Okay. We have the actinomycetes. These are a group of filamentous bacteria which help in breaking down more recalcitrant organic compounds. So these ones are things that are a bit tough. They are recalcitrant because they are a bit tough. Okay, so then the actinomycetes now come and target these ones. They specialize in breaking down these tough ones. Okay, so then in a way, the actinomycetes are now a key component of the humification process. The second category are the physical fragmenters. Okay, so you are talking of things like earthworms, insects. So these are the detritivores. So earthworms will consume the litter. They will digest the organic matter. Then as they do that, whatever they excrete after consuming the litter, after digesting it, what they excrete is nutrient rich. So by excreting nutrient rich components, they now end up enhancing soil fertility. The earthworms as well, they move, they burrow inside the soil. As they move, the roots they create will enhance aeration in the soil. The arthropods, you are talking of the insects, they help in shredding, physically breaking down the litter into smaller particles. By doing that, they increase the surface area for microbial colonization. Termites, they help in breaking down cellulose because they have special symbiotic gut microorganisms. So they are microorganisms within the gut of the termites which help to break down cellulose. We have the gastropods, so things like snails, slugs. So these are mollusks which feed on the decaying plant material. As they feed on this decaying plant material, they contribute to the physical breakdown. Okay? So they break down the nutrients, they break down that material physically through feeding on it. Then in a way, through the waste that they'll give out, that waste will be having nutrients. Then you have the protists and the nematodes. So with protists, you're talking of protozoa. So the protozoa will feed on bacteria and fungi. So by doing that, they regulate the population of these bacteria, the population of the fungi. But in the process, because they feed on the bacteria and fungi, so help in regulating the population. But the waste they produce will have nutrients. Okay? Then the nematodes, so things like worms, they also consume bacteria, fungi, and other soil microorganisms. So in the process, they help in cycling the nutrients and also influencing the microbial community structure. Let's look at now the decomposer network. Okay, so decomposition is not just happening in a linear process, but is a dynamic interconnected network. So the decomposers will interact, and in the process of that interaction, it will influence how that cycling of nutrients is happening. So the primary decomposers will always start off the process. So the primary decomposers, these are things like fungi, bacteria, the actinomycetes. Then, after now the primary decomposers, the bacteria, the fungi, the actinomycetes have set off the process, now the detritivores come in to help engineer the ecosystem. So earthworms and insects will fragment the litter by creating smaller particles. So upon creation of smaller particles, the microbes will now colonize. They will have increased the surface area. Okay. Among the detritivores as well, we have things like termites, which help to decompose woody materials. So as they decompose these woody materials, they release carbon and other nutrients. That's why unaona kuna mbao ile yenye termites will eat. So you have now chemicals which you are told to spray on the timber so that the termites don't eat. Then you have now the microbial consumer interaction. So the protozoa and nematodes, they feed on microorganisms. They graze on the microorganisms. Then the fungal hyphae, which act as a nutrient highway. Okay. So the fungi have extensions, and it's through these extensions the nutrients will move, will be transported through those extensions of the fungi. Then there is a feedback loop through which regulation happens. So through decomposition, nutrients are released. Okay? But in turn, plants will shed more litter. So more litter is shed, which is decomposed to release more nutrients. Then these nutrients will stimulate the growth of plants. Then in turn, as the plants grow, they will release more litter. So in a way, it is now becoming a cycle. So litter is released by plants. This litter is decomposed. Upon decomposition, this litter releases nutrients. The released nutrients stimulate more growth. Okay? So as the litter decomposes, the microbial communities also keep shifting. So you have the early stage bacteria, the ones that will come and begin working on the litter. Then these early stage bacteria will now be replaced by things that come in now as the complexity increases. So microbial organisms will also be working in succession. When you only have fresh litter, what you have largely at that stage are the early stage bacteria. Zile zinakuja now to work on what is easy to be decomposed, the starch, the amino acid. Then after the starch and amino acid has been worked on, has been broken down, now more complex, you have the fungi, you have the actinomycetes that now come in to break down the cellulose, to break down lignin, to come and target those things that are more tough. Okay? So succession also happens within this decomposition process. Environmental factors will influence this process because decomposer interactions will intensify in a warm and moist environment. So it means then the climate and the level of moisture. When the temperatures are relatively warm and when there is more moisture, then we expect to have a higher interaction, a higher presence of microorganisms. But when there is not enough moisture, that is during a drought, or if it is too cold that the temperatures are too low, then we don't expect to have such a lively interaction. So the intensity in the breakdown, the intensity in the decomposition will change in line with the climate and the availability of moisture. There are microbes and plants which will release chemicals. These chemicals will attract specific decomposers. So then it means there are chemical signals that are released not only by the microbes, but also the plants, which are supposed now to bring the litter that the microbes will work on. So the specific chemicals that will be released will now attract certain decomposers. So then it means you might not have an entire range of decomposers present in different ecosystems on the basis of which chemicals have been released by which plants. That is now what will determine the type of decomposers you find in a particular litter decomposing setting. So which factors affect the decomposition of litter? Okay. So the rate at which litter decomposes will vary across ecosystems. And what leads to this variation, one is the litter quality and composition. So in terms of chemical composition, things that determine how fast decomposition might happen is, for example, the carbon to nitrogen ratio. So if you have more nitrogen, then you are likely to have a high rate of decomposition. Okay? Higher rate of decomposition. So if you have a high nitrogen, it means the ratio will be low. But if you have a low nitrogen, then the ratio will be high. So on the basis of the presence, the level of nitrogen, then you are likely to have either the decomposition being speeded up or being slowed down. Then the lignin and cellulose content. High lignin will resist microbial breakdown. So when you have high lignin, then you expect then the decomposition will be low. The rate of decomposition will be low. Okay. Then the secondary compounds. There are some plants which will produce some chemicals, secondary compounds, that will inhibit microbial activity. So on the basis of what secondary compounds are produced by that plant, it will impact on the rate of microbial activity. Now, on the physical properties, things of how big is the leaf size, how thick, okay, is, for example, the bark. What about the surface area? So these ones will affect how easily the litter fragments and how accessible it is to the decomposers. So if something is too big, if something is too thick, then it might not be easily accessible. Okay. Then climatic factors, so things like temperature. If the temperatures are warmer, then we are likely to have an accelerated microbial metabolism, a higher enzymatic activity. Then with that, decomposition will be speeded up. If the temperatures are cold, okay, the temperatures that are cold will lead to a slow microbial processes. If the microbial processes are slower, then litter will accumulate within that particular ecosystem. The other climatic factor is moisture. So adequate moisture will enhance microbial and detritive activity. So when the moisture is adequate, then we have a higher microbial activity, higher detritive activity. Therefore, decomposition will be promoted. So too much moisture will create anaerobic conditions, which will slow down decomposition. So it means you don't need to have too much water. You just need to have enough of the moisture. The other climatic factor is the precipitation and drought. So regular rainfall aids nutrient leaching and microbial hydration. But when you have extended drought, they will lead to a limited microbial activity, and even the breakdown of this litter process will also be slowed down. The third factor are the soil characteristics. So soil texture and structure. Looser, well-aerated soils will promote oxygen availability. if you are dealing with aerobic decomposers. So if the decomposers need more oxygen, then they will work well where the level of oxygen is highly available. When does that happen? When the soils are looser and well aerated. But soils that are compacted, soils that are waterlogged, will eventually slow down decomposition because aerobic decomposers will not have enough access to oxygen. The other characteristic, the other factor within the soil characteristics is pH and nutrient availability. So neutral to slightly acidic soils will typically support diverse microbial communities. Okay, so if you have a pH that is neutral or slightly acidic, then you expect that you'll have different microbial communities within that particular ecosystem. But when the pH is either extremely acidic or alkalinic, then the diversity of decomposers will be limited. Okay. Then the decomposer community. In terms of microbial diversity, rich, diverse microbial communities will accelerate decomposition. So when the microbial communities are diverse, when they are rich, which means there are many, then the rate of decomposition is likely to be accelerated. How? Because of enzymatic specialization. Different microorganisms are likely to produce different enzymes. So when you have many varieties, a high number of microorganisms, you are likely to have equally as different enzymes as the microorganisms come. So the different microorganisms are likely to produce different enzymes, and the different enzymes are likely now to decompose the variety of litter that will be present. The other aspect of decomposer community is the detritivore activity. So earthworms, insects, and other detritivores will help in fragmenting the litter. Once the litter is fragmented, then the microbial access will be enhanced. Okay. So the abundance and diversity of detritivores will drastically influence the decomposition rates. So if you have a higher abundance, a higher diversity of detritivores, so you have many and different varieties, then you are likely to have a higher decomposition rate. Ecosystem and vegetation type. In this case, for example, if you are dealing with a forest versus a grassland, the forest litter, so the leaf litter with the high lignin content, will decompose slower compared to a grassland litter. Okay, so the grass will just have litter that is easily degradable. Then plant species and traits. Different plant species will contribute litter of varying quality. So the litter which is coming in with different quality will eventually affect the dynamics of decomposition, because decomposition is a factor of the quality of the litter. So different plant species will produce different types of litter. The different types of litter will be decomposed differently on the basis of the quality that litter has. This decomposition is happening within an ecosystem which has human influence. So which means then human influence will also impact decomposition. So land use changes, for example, deforestation, agriculture, and urbanization will change the litter inputs. Once the litter inputs are changed, then the decomposer communities will also be altered. Pollution and climate change, which are largely creations of human influence, they are also likely to disrupt the microbial processes. So pollutants can disrupt the microbial processes. Climate change can affect temperature, can affect moisture. Okay, so by doing so, then it will by extension impact the decomposition process. So why is litter decomposition important? Why does it matter? Or which ecological significance does litter decomposition play? Which role does it play in an ecosystem? So one is nutrient cycling and soil fertility. Through decomposition, nutrients will be released into the ecosystem. So that is important. Humus formation, the breakdown, the partially decomposed organic matter will contribute to humus. Humus is stable, is nutrient rich as a component of the soil. So therefore the humus will improve not only the soil structure, the moisture retention, but also the cation exchange capacity, which then in the long term will enhance soil fertility. The carbon and climate regulation. Through carbon cycling, decomposition releases carbon dioxide. Okay? So this carbon dioxide that is released as a result of decomposition will be released back into the atmosphere. So it will then help the carbon cycle. If we don't release carbon dioxide as a result of decomposition, then we are likely to tilt the presence of carbon in the ecosystem. Okay? So some carbon which is stored in the soil as a stable organic matter can act as a carbon sink, which will help in mitigating climate change. Okay? But at times, when now you till the same soil, then you release this carbon. Okay? So the soil can act as a carbon sink. Forests can also act as a carbon sink. That's why there is a very delicate balance on cutting the forests as well as tilling land. Because when you till land, you now release the carbon which the soil was acting as a carbon sink with. Greenhouse gas balances. So the completeness and the speed at which decomposition happens will influence the greenhouse gas emissions. So gases like methane, nitrous oxide can be released on the basis of how fast decomposition is happening. Okay. Then habitat creation and the biodiversity support. So the decomposition of litter will provide food and shelter for countless organisms. So bacteria, fungi, earthworms, and insects. When litter is decomposed, is not only producing food, but it's also producing shelter for them to live. Okay. So it means then decomposition is creating microhabitats. These microhabitats will help to sustain soil biodiversity. And by doing that, it will now end up supporting a very complex food web within the ecosystem. Okay? Then it would also help to impact on the soil structure and prevent soil erosion. Okay. So organic matter, when it is decomposed, when the decomposed material, it will end up now binding soil particles. Okay. So organic matter can act as a soil binder. When it binds soil particles together, it promotes aggregation, and that will help in improving soil porosity. So stable soils, because of this binder, will resist soil erosion. When soil erosion is resisted, it will prevent the loss of nutrients. So the soil will not be degraded. And in essence, then, it will help to sustain ecosystems, to support ecosystems that are sustainable. Okay? Then the ecosystem resilience and productivity. The decomposition of plant litter will help to fuel plant growth in the future. Okay? So it means when you are breaking down a plant through decomposition, through litter decomposition, because it's the dead part of a plant which is we are now calling litter, which is being broken down, and that's now what we are calling litter decomposition. So by breaking down that dead plant part, you end up creating what the plant needs to grow. Okay? So in a way, you are creating just a feedback loop of nutrients. You break down a dead plant part, you produce nutrients that will help to grow another plant. Then when a part of this plant that has been grown with the help of these nutrients, when the plant dies, it will also be broken down. So you end up now with an ecosystem that is resilient because the nutrients can be looped in a feedback mode. So when you break down this dead material, the decomposers, by breaking them down, they prevent this litter from accumulating. Because when you have litter which is accumulated on the ground, you risk fire, for example. Matawi ikiwa hapo chini, moto ikianza itachoma. But hiyo matawi kama imekuwa broken down, okay, then there will be nothing that the fire can do, what can burn. If the litter will also accumulate, it will be so damp hapo chini, increasing possibilities of disease spread. But when it is broken down, then the ecosystem, in a way, adopts in making sure that there is no fire risk, there is no disease spread. The last component, which is critical, is the human benefit and the ecosystem service. When you are decomposing litter, all that you are doing, there is nutrient recycling, there is nutrient provision for the soil, so the soil will be more fertile. When the soil is more fertile, who benefits? Human. So agricultural sustainability. Because the soil is more beneficial, is more fertile now, it will now reduce the reliance on chemical fertilizers. Because chemical fertilizers, they come and lead to pollution, changing of the soil pH. But if we let decomposers work, then we end up with more fertile soils, which are a creation of nature. So at the end of it, the agricultural process is now more sustainable because it's being supported by nature. Then with the ecosystem services, by virtue of the natural waste recycling, okay, so you end up now creating a way in which nature can recycle itself. And by nature recycling itself, landscapes will be prevented from becoming overwhelmed with the dead material. If the litter, if plants that died will not be decomposed, then we will not, one, be able to recycle the nutrients that they have. Then two, we will not have even space where to carry out our other agricultural practices. Because kama matawi imeanguka, it cannot be decomposed. It will live there forever. So where will it go? Okay, we come up with compost pits because we have this litter being decomposed. But if the litter will never be decomposed, then we will become overwhelmed. And there will be no way again in which we can return some of these vital nutrients to the earth. Because plants rely on the earth. Plants find the earth to have a nutritive value because decomposition happened. So if decomposition cannot happen, one, we cannot recycle waste. So waste will be everywhere. Then two, the nutrients that are in the waste, in the dead plant, will not find a way of being recycled, being returned to the earth. So it will mean we will need to fertilize, we will need to apply fertilization to the earth constantly. But if we are able to decompose, then we don't need to apply chemical fertilizers because vital nutrients that are present in the litter can be returned to the earth. Then as we plant on the earth is now able to support the plants that we are giving out. So in summary, litter decomposition is an engine which helps in driving the health, the stability and the productivity of ecosystems. Okay, so it means then litter decomposition is such a vital component, is such a vital process within an ecosystem, because without it, the health of the ecosystem, the stability of the ecosystem, and the productivity of that ecosystem is likely to be compromised. Okay, so we've covered that process of litter decomposition. We've seen the various stages, we've seen what impacts it, then we've seen how beneficial it is. So listen through this video, read through the notes, and if you have a question, as usual, I'll be happy to respond. At that stage, I want to thank you again, and I look forward to interacting next. Asanteni sana.